What's going on, everybody? Tim from Tearfund Orbital. So today is going to be a little bit more of an in-depth video. I would like to talk about an install that I completed late last week. This is for the Roman Props V2 steel version. This particular hilt and install has been on my bucket list of installs that I've wanted to do. It is not your average hilt to install, so I had to attack this, both the design of the chassis and the install. I do attack it in a little bit of a different approach than what I am used to. So especially with this particular install, this hilt, the client did want a Rudy Pando chamber with this particular one as well. So there's a lot of moving parts in this install, quite literally, right? So we've got an internal custom machined crystal chamber that slides out. The whole hilt telescopes out, and we have an exposed crystal. So wiring this up was a little bit of a challenge, and also doing the chassis for it was a little bit of a challenge. So I'd like to talk about all of that. I'd like to talk a little bit about this particular hilt, with where the design came from, where we see it, what films we see it in, and then of course we'll talk about the chassis, and we'll do a quick demo, right? So, like I said, this is Luke's hilt from Return of the Jedi. This is what we see. This is the version that we see, as the belt hanger. We do see it briefly, a stunt version of it briefly on the barge scene. The Magic of Myth hilt is the Luke hilt from those films from Return of the Jedi that I love. I really, really wanted that hilt in my collection. The V2, it was a cool looking hilt. It never really grabbed me, right? But obviously, par for the course, and this is what happens time and time again. I got this particular hilt in hand, and I loved it. I mean, I love the feeling of a steel hilt. I love Graflex parts. I'm a huge fan of the thin neck lightsabers from the original series or the original trilogy. So yeah, I got this hilt in hand and I loved it, and it's a very, very beautiful hilt. So this is the Roman Props version. In my opinion, anything from Roman Props is going to be like the top tier. Some of the best reproduction hilts, best quality machined hilts, and so this is no different, right? So this hilt is just an absolutely beautifully machined hilt, and it's steel, so it's heavy, it feels like a weapon. This particular hilt also was pre-stenciled, so the client sent this to me, so it was already ready to go. I didn't have to apply the stencils. I've looked into doing that, and doing the stenciling is not an easy task. So I'm glad that this was sent to me pre-stenciled. But other than that, yeah, so we had to put a Rudy chamber or a Pando chamber in this one, and wire it up, and that was a little bit of a challenge. So without further ado, let's get into it, right? So let's talk about the chassis first, and then we will open this guy up, and I will talk about the install. Okay, so let's come down into Fusion. This is the chassis that I did for this install. So immediately, right off the bat, it's a small chassis. So because of the limited amount of space in this hilt due to the Pando chamber, I had to go with an 18350 battery setup, right? And the other thing that I wanted to make sure of was that we had board and USB access easily without having to unscrew anything or slide anything out. So the way that I achieved that was going with a kicked Profi board, and this sits just underneath the threading for the pommel. We'll take a closer look of that. We'll take a closer look at that when we go over the hilt. But just a really, really simple chassis setup. All my leads come out the top here, and they are hidden inside of the clamp card area, or underneath the clamp card area. And that's pretty much it, right? We've got a battery tray here. I did do some very, very light greebly work on this guy, but because space was so limited, I couldn't really get crazy with that, right? We do not have a kill switch in this build either. You are effectively the kill switch. This has been set up with a Profi V3, which from what I understand, handles power management a little bit better. There is a deep sleep mode, so there is no kill switch. Not that we would have had room for it, or much room for it anyway, so I just foregoed the kill switch in this build. Off to the right here, you will see the switch holder. So I did design a custom switch holder that goes in between the Graflex clamp underneath the clamp card, right? So this is something that was a little tricky to get the tolerances for. I do have two holes here that they will house two 3mm springs. The springs help to keep the clamp card pressed up against the lip of the clamp card holder. So I'll go over that a little bit more in detail as well when we look up close. But so you've got to sand down the clamp card for this particular build. That way you get some play, so you can utilize that clamp card for switches. So I wanted to make sure that the clamp card didn't just slide out. So I achieved that with springs. I believe either Goth or Shtok does something very similar with their switch holder. It's just a no-brainer. It helps to keep the clamp card in place, right? We've got two tactile switches that sit in these two channels. Getting all the tolerances set for both the chassis and the switch holder was a little bit of a challenge as well, right? A lot of very tight build. It's just a very, very tight build. So let's come up top and talk about the hilt. So here it is. This is the steel V2 from Roman Props. God, this is an absolutely beautiful hilt. Okay, so we've got the mystery chunk in here. This does come from Roman Props as well. D-ring. We've got a cone-shaped knurled retainer nut. Where is that? Yeah, here it is. We've got a retainer nut here. So, just a great film-accurate hilt from Roman Props. And it's hefty. It's in steel, right? So let's talk about how to get at the chassis first, right? So to get at the chassis, you want to unscrew your pommel. Both the pommel and this section are one. So you unscrew your pommel. Here's the chassis, okay? So I'm not quite sure if you can see, but just underneath the threads here is where your USB and your SD card are, and you can get those out easily. You can get the SD card out easily, or you can plug into your USB if need be, okay? A little bit of a different approach, like I said, for this chassis, okay? So, to put your battery in, this does take an 18350 battery. Flat part of your battery goes towards the spring. So another thing that is interesting about this particular hilt and this install, the pommel obviously does not have any venting in it. Not that there would have been really a lot of room in the pommel for a speaker. So the speaker, because of the way that Rudy designed his crystal chamber, the speaker, there is like a chamber for the speaker to sit in that points down into this clamp card chamber. Okay. So that's a really, really elegant solution for having a speaker. It's also big enough to get a 28mm in there. So I've got a 28mm bass elite dark side speaker in here from Smuggler's Outpost, and it sounds really, really good. Okay. So once you get your battery in, you want to put your pommel back on, and you're ready to go. Okay. So we've got, I guess, do we want to look at that really quick? So let's look at that. So I'm not sure if you can quite see that either. So here are those two springs that hold the clamp card in place. Once you get your clamp card in, you shouldn't really ever have to take the clamp card out, but it just really helps. Those springs really help to keep that in place. So the top button is your main, bottom is your aux. Okay. All right, so we've got a perfect amount of play between the clamp card and those switches. Nice and clicky. Right?
What's this? That lightsaber was Luke's.
So now obviously for the money shot, right? So we want to get at that crystal chamber. So I like full disclosure, okay, this is a very delicate build. Obviously, I don't recommend dueling with this hilt. I really don't recommend dealing with most hilts unless they are specifically like dueling hilts, right? So once it's a quarter, not even a quarter turn, it's like an eighth of a turn to loosen that crystal chamber, and it slides out, okay? So you want to be kind of delicate when you're doing that. Once you get that open, we get a really good look at that crystal chamber. So this Pando chamber kind of sits on a rail or two rails, and you'll get the feel for it after you use it a couple of times. So you want to, as you're closing the hilt, it's just another small twist towards you, right? And then to get it open, you do it again. So this crystal chamber is really, really rad, right? So the Pando chamber comes with a crystal, some brass mounts for the crystal, and these brass rods. There's 3 brass rods. The client for this particular install wanted the Shtok upgrade option for this particular chamber, right? So Shtok has brass crystal chamber modules that were designed specifically for the Pando chamber. There's also a grill fin back here as well. So those 3 parts were added as well. I weathered them, and I also added some accents, right? So we've got some nickel wound guitar string in here. There are some brass bars down at the bottom here, just to make it a little bit more unique. So I took a lot of inspiration from Proplicator's build of this same setup, this same crystal chamber. The client did also request that, right? So I added, like I said, I added those nickel wound guitar strings. There is also, it's hard to see on camera, but there is a lab-grown emerald up top here that is flipped, so it's pointing down. That cone, or the point of the emerald, is pointing down into that quartz point as well. There's a real quartz crystal in there. And that's it, right? So we've got 2 neopixels in this crystal chamber, one in the bottom and one in the top. The way that I set up the blade is that I did a split blade. Okay, so the top part of the blade is essentially white, so it just shines through that green emerald. The bottom part of the blade is the animated part. So every font's got something different.
I'm a Jedi, like my father before me.
Every font's got a little something different in it, right? And that's pretty much it. And then you close her up and you're ready to go. So let's come down to the bottom here. Twist to activate, twist to deactivate are on. Got it. It just feels, I love steel hilts. They feel like weapons to me. So let's put a blade in it and talk a little bit about the emitter section as well. Okay, so something I neglected to mention, this is a recessed blade setup. So in my opinion, right, most thin neck hilts with this emitter shape should all take recessed blades. And the reason for that is you just do not have a lot of room for a standard blade to get enough of the set screw to bite it, to be secure, to be sturdy. So in my opinion, all thin neck sabers should have a recessed blade. So I do actually just so happen to have a recessed blade. Jeremy from Solo Sabers did me a huge solid and made one for me. And this is perfect. It worked just fine for me right out of the box. I didn't need to adjust it or anything. And it works perfectly in this V2, right? So to the client, you will need a recessed blade. And I do believe I mentioned that to you during this journey, right? So you take your recessed blade, you want to slide it in the emitter until it stops, and then you tighten your set screw. There is a small set screw along the side of just under the lip of the emitter, if I could get the right sized Allen key. So yeah, just underneath that lip, there is a set screw. You want to tighten that until it's just, actually you really want to tighten this down because it is a thin neck. There's not a lot of room, all right? So once you get your set screw ready, you're good to go. See what else we got on here.
The NASA team is ready.
So I put the majority of Luke fonts on this, right? Got to increase the clash on that. Let's see what else we got.
Father and son.
So the majority of the fonts on here have been set up with color wheel. To get to color wheel, you want to hold down aux and tap main. When you find a color that you like, you tap main again, and it'll lock that color in. Really, really beautiful hilt. Love this thing. So that's pretty much it. I know that was a little bit longer than my typical videos. I did want to make sure that I went over the install on this because this is the first time I've done one of these, and I'm so proud of the result. So much so, obviously, that I got my own. I got my own, and I'll be installing this one as well with the same setup. It's just an absolutely beautiful hilt, and I love the weight. I love the look of it. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. There was some people asking as well, like how I approached this. So that's all I've got. To the client, thank you very much for trusting me with this build. To the viewers, everybody, thank you so much for watching. If anyone has any questions regarding this particular install or anything really, please don't be a stranger. And with that being said, may the force be with you always. Thanks for watching, everybody.